I had three sisters. My oldest sister's name was Linda. My middle sister was Dorothy, and my youngest sister was Ernestine. My mom was a school teacher and a librarian. She worked at Farmington, Greenland, West Fork, Lincoln, and Prairie Grove Schools. She ended her career with Prairie Grove Schools. My father ran the Farm Service Co-op for several years, and we also had a little small farm here in Farmington where we had two small chicken houses. So my dad ended up his career owning a service station, which is a gas station for those that don't know that what a service station is. And so that's where he ended his career before he retired and just retired to raising chickens. My part was I had to feed the chickens every day and before school, and then when we got home from school, I fed the chickens with my mom, and then we would leave usually around 4:30, and we'd go to my dad's service station, and we'd work there till we closed each night about 10 o'clock. Of course, I started in the banking business in 1976, and actually for 3 months I worked for First National Bank of Fayetteville. And then I went to work for First Federal Savings and Loan and was there for about 15 years before joining Arvest Bank. When I first started with Arvest Bank, I was a mortgage lender, so I did strictly home loans. And that's what I did at the Savings and Loan also. That was strictly my job there. When I moved over to Arvest, that was what they wanted me to do. They had a loan production office on Joyce Street, which was right in the middle of all the real estate companies. And so that's what my primary job duties were. When I came to Farmington, that was I guess it was right at when Arvest bought Farmers and Merchants Bank of Prairie Grove, and they had a location here in Farmington, a little branch bank. So they really wanted to start the lending function from the Farmington location because basically it was a deposit branch and had never had any lending functions there. So actually I did all types of loans. I did agricultural, consumer, real estate, commercial, and home loans. My earliest memories? My grandmother lived on Bodark Street, and in fact my parents lived right next door to her before we bought our farm. And so I would stay with her every day when my mom was teaching school and my sisters were in school. So I just remember walking down Bodark every day, and when I was old enough to do it by myself, but I'd go down and go to Miss McNeil's store, buy my grandma groceries if she had a grocery list, and that was kind of the place to hang out in the early days in Farmington. I remember we had Rika White had a little store. Then Miss McNeil had her store. Of course, the post office there were several post offices locations during the time I've lived here. And then there was the Superette, which was Phillips Superette, right next to the Baptist Church. And then Joe Giles's parents owned a little store at the corner of 170 and 62. And of course, Davis and Collins laundromat and the Davis's grocery store. I remember there right across the street from McNeil's store, there was a little kind of just a small building there that I remember the first post office. Then they built the one next door to Miss McNeil's store, so they expanded it a little bit. And then they moved it to, I believe, across from the Phillips Superette. There was a little place there that right now is where the Richardson Center had located to and was there. And then they moved down to another building. They built another building that's right just past the McNeil store. That's currently a dental office right now. So, and then I think was the last place they were there before they built the new location on Saratoga Way. Farmington was kind of a rural school, and of course Highway 62 was just a two-lane road. So, but it was we had just the basic school buildings. I remember we played football and basketball and baseball out between the buildings, and but it was just a good little country school. Everyone knew each other. The big events in the school was I remember going to the basketball games and watching my sisters play basketball when they were in school, and of course going to the football games. And baseball was a big sport too, so I enjoyed watching baseball and also participating. The old gym, I remember on one side of the gym they had really steep bleachers that were about a 45-degree angle. But I remember I would sit on the front row on the home side of the bleachers and right next to the concession stand. And so I wanted to be real close to where I could get popcorn or a Coke, or somebody come by and give me money to buy a popcorn and Coke with. But I'd sit there and I could see my sisters, watching them play and seeing them on the bench. And so I remember just, like I say, it was kind of a community event. A lot of people came and just enjoyed being there. And it would get very hot in there because it was a small gym with a lot of people could fit in there. Well, a lot of the kids I went to school with a lot of them are still in the Farmington area. Of course, our fire chief, Mark Cunningham, and I went to school together. My cousin, Terry Swift, he moved back to Farmington, and so he lives here, and him and I were buddies. We hung out together. But there was just a lot of kids that I went to school with, and I actually went to 3 different schools when I was growing up, and my mom was a teacher, and so when she left Farmington schools, I went with her to Greenland for 2 years, and then when she accepted a job in Lincoln, I decided that I didn't want to go to the Lincoln schools because it's so far away, and I ended up going to Prairie Grove my last 4 years in school. Oh, I mean, when they had the championship games, that was a big deal for Farmington because Coach Alan Holland, he had a dynasty here, and that's and his work ethics for those boys, for them to do what they did with no more players than they had. I know that those guys put in so much more work than I think maybe that football teams put in today's world, but they were just a hard-nosed group. But they all grew up together. They worked in the summertime, hauling hay, working manual labor on farms. And then when they came to school, Coach Holland got them in football shape. And but they just, it was just a bunch of good kids, and a lot of good athletes came through Farmington. Oh, I mean, it was just awesome. I mean, they made a name for themselves all over the state of Arkansas because when they beat Danville was the power in that division. And Danville beat teams 70-0, 60-0. I mean, you couldn't even score on them. And when Farmington beat them and unseated them as a state championship team, that was huge. And then people kind of thought that it might have just been a fluke, but then the next year they did it again. That kind of set the tone for Farmington football. Well, I knew Bill Beckett and his family very well. Donald Williams and his family, we kind of all grew up together with my sisters and my mom and dad, and I knew them. It's kind of amazing how you think about who influenced you in your life. I know Mr. Reef at the Prairie Grove Bank. I knew him from the time when my dad had his business, and I used to go in there to the bank with him when I was a kid and opened up a savings account, and so I got started in my banking career early, but I remember those people. It was kind of funny. One of our biggest treats was when we went to the A&W, and so on Sundays, a lot of times with my mom and dad and myself and my sisters when they were still at home, that was a big treat for us to load up in the car, go to the A&W root beer restaurant in Fayetteville, and get to have a big frosty root beer after church. But the thing that I remember most about that is that my dad would have to be so conscious of what the weather was doing, because having chickens, we didn't have power windows for the windows in the chicken houses and power feeders, and everything was done manually. So if we were enjoying a root beer at the A&W and a storm cell started coming up from the west, we had to get home and get the chicken houses prepared for a storm if it was going to rain or whatever. So there was many a times we were we were drinking those root beers as fast as we could, and we took our food home with us. We went to the First Baptist Church here in Farmington on Main Street. It's now known as the Main Street Baptist Church, but that's the church that I grew up in, and my mom and dad both stayed there and went there until they passed away. When I moved back to Farmington, or when I was offered a job to move from Arvest Fayetteville to Arvest Prairie Grove. And Greg Reed was president of the bank at that time, and what they wanted to do, Jim Walton felt very strongly that we needed to have a strong presence in our local communities. And so they felt like, since I had a kind of a background of being in Farmington, I was a Farmington boy, but even though I did go to school at Prairie Grove and I did go to school at Greenland, I had a pretty strong community tie to this location. And so they wanted to establish this branch here in Farmington, and so they felt like that I would be a good candidate, and I wasn't so sure that that's what I wanted to do, if I wanted to move back to Farmington, because I'd lived in Fayetteville a few years, and well, about 15 years, and so it was kind of something that I wasn't sure I wanted to do. But once I made the decision to come out here, it's been a great decision for me. But part of my reason to be in Farmington, our bank wanted me to have a very strong community presence. And one of the things that, be involved in the PTA, be involved in the Booster Club, but one of the things that came about when I moved here, the existing city council had a vacancy come up. And so the former mayor, Roy Drake, called me and asked me if I would have an interest in filling a term on the city council. And I knew nothing about city government at that time, I mean zero. And so I checked with Greg Reed, and our president. He said, "Oh yeah, I think that'll be just fine," and told him how many meetings they had and so forth. But that was really kind of my start of community service, was serving on the council. And so I filled a spot on the city council for 2 years, I believe. And then I felt like that I felt like to be able to do, for our city to move forward, I felt like that I needed to be more involved in city government. And thankfully, Arvest Bank allowed me to do that, because it's kind of like it is like having a second job. I mean, it is a second full-time job. But they allowed me to run for mayor after my council term was up. And there was Roy Drake was the existing mayor. And then there was another candidate that was on the ballot in the first term that I ran for. And I actually won without a runoff, which is usually unheard of with 3 candidates. So I was very proud of that. I think I had 58% of the vote, which was it was a confidence builder for me. But we were in a transition at that time. Our city was. We were getting ready to have a lot of residential growth in Farmington. Southwind subdivision was just beginning to start, and I just saw, and it's no fault of anyone, but when you have growing pains, you have to be able to go forward and make changes, and that's a tough thing to do in government, and it's hard for me to make changes. I get used to doing things a certain way, and it's hard to change, personally or in your business life or whatever profession you're in. So with encouragement from a lot of the existing council members and people that were in Farmington at that time, our population had started to change. We had new families moving in with the new housing developments, and we just felt like that was the time to move forward. And I really enjoyed, and I still do enjoy city government. I really enjoy being part of. I can see the fruit of our labor when you see accomplishments that affects thousands of people come to fruition. It's pretty awesome. And so that's where I started in the city government. I was elected for a 4-year, a 4-year term. My first term was in 1999. I went 4 years, and after the first 4 years, after talking to my employer a little bit, my business at the bank had expanded so much that it was hard to balance my working atmosphere at both places. And so I decided that I thought, well, maybe I need to step aside, take a breath, and maybe not run for mayor or be mayor for the next term. And once I did that, then we kind of reevaluated. I came back and joined the council 2 years later, served 2 years on it, and then I ran for mayor the next term, and then I've been mayor for all the terms since then. John Harris served his term the 4 years after my first term, and then since then I've been the mayor each 4-year election. So it's been four. I've had 4 terms, and I'm in my 15th year. So next year will be the election year. So if I run for re-election, that'll be I'll be starting a 5th term, and assuming I get elected. The one of the things that Farmington has always done, and all the mayors in Farmington, the latter mayors, had kept the city in a good financial position. Jean Swift, who worked at First Federal Savings and Loan, she was a vice president there. She was the city clerk. And so she was always overseeing the funds. She was a banker, so she kept a close eye on the funds and how it was being spent. And the council members were always good stewards of the money for the city of Farmington. And so the old city hall we had kind of was a dual purpose facility. It had originally been, the fire station was in one end of it, and the city hall was in the other end. And so we had an office for the mayor and an office for the court clerk and an office for the police chief, and then kind of some desks out in the lobby, and that was pretty much it. So and then they moved and built a building across the street for the fire station. So when they did that, they closed in the fire station end of it, and that was kind of our meeting room, our conference room, and it kind of served as a senior center later on. But that's where we met, and I remember. The first, I had never been to a city council meeting until I got on the council, but we had folding tables put back to back, and the mayor and the clerk and the city attorney sat at one end, and there was 4 council members on each side of the folding tables, and they were all joined. So we were a close-knit group. But then anybody that came to the council meetings would sit out in chairs that were close by, and then if they had something on the agenda, then they would step up to our folding chairs and speak their piece, and then the council would vote on it. So it was a good learning experience for me. I really enjoyed getting to know a lot of the council members back then, and they encouraged me. I mean, I know when you replace someone who has been a good mayor for years, it's tough to see that change, and it's tough for the people that had been loyal to Mr. Roy, and so I felt like that with their confidence and vote, that they felt I could do the job, and I wanted to do the job, and we made some good changes, but the council members were the ones that were agreeable to make those changes work. So, yeah, it was kind of an interesting deal, and I remember Mr. Larry Evans, who is still here in Farmington, still lives here, and I got tickled because my first council meeting that I sat in as an alderman, they were looking at an issue on the agenda, and when we got the agenda, I was looking for the supporting documentation that goes with the agenda items, but all I got was a one-page agenda that listed all the items that we were going to be discussing. And so I remember there was an item that Mr. Evans had sponsored, and I think it was on its 3rd reading or whatever the issue was, and so whenever it came to start voting, well, everybody started voting, yes, and then I was at the end of the row where he was sitting, and I voted. I said I'm going to have to vote no. And then everybody kind of hesitated, and then it went to the other side, and everybody voted yes. And I remember Larry leaned back in his chair and looked down at me, and he goes, "Do you have a problem with this?" And in this real serious, gruff voice, and Larry was a big guy, he's a little bit intimidating. And I said, "No, sir, Mr. Evans." I said, "I couldn't vote for it because I didn't know anything about it. So I didn't have any information to make a judgment, but I said, I go with whatever the council supports it, then I'm good with it, but I have to vote based on my knowledge of the issue, and I didn't have enough knowledge to be able to vote a positive vote." And he goes, "Oh, okay." He goes, "That makes sense." And then we were good from then. And every time I see him, he comes by the bank, and he's a customer, and we laugh. And I said, "Remember, Larry, the first item you brought before the council?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I always remember that." But it was pretty interesting. But that's when you could see how things had been done And we needed to get away from, I guess, you want to have a simplified format, and you want to make council meetings fun and entertaining, but you also want to get in and do your business and get out. I remember we had 3 and 4 hour council meetings, which, we didn't need to. And so, but it was enjoyable, and I got to experience what I needed to see to be able to make changes and the way we did business and things like that. So, it was a lot of fun. When we were growing as fast as we were able to start saving money for a new building. We had purchased this land from the Phillips family, actually. And so we had this land up here where the senior center is and where our city hall is. And actually we built the senior center first, I believe. And so what we did is that we went out in the community and we basically got support from Bill Beckett and Donald Williams and Keith Mars, Roy Hummel and his family and Betty. Several of the people knew we had a need for that facility. And we had done a good job of saving money. And so we had the money in the bank to be able to actually build that facility first. And so it was kind of funny that we had a meeting one night at the Farmington School auditorium. And Judge Jerry Hunton came to that meeting. And he was there because our old facility where the seniors was meeting was not adequate. It was poor. It didn't heat and cool very good, and they really needed to have their own location. So he comes to this meeting and says, guys, we're here to get this senior center off dead center, and we need to get them a new facility. And City of Farmington, you have the land to build it on, and so what we're here for tonight is to get that commitment to build it. And it was kind of funny. He was walking around the room and talking, and Jerry was a very eloquent speaker, but he got down to the point very quickly. He didn't hem-haw around about what he was there for. And I remember he came over and stood behind myself and Jimmy Ferguson, and I can't remember who the other person was he stood behind, but he said, who's going to lead that charge to get the senior center built? And he puts his hand on my shoulder and Jimmy Ferguson's shoulder, and he goes, I wonder who that could be. So that was kind of the start of our construction of building over here on this property. We went together and was able to, we found a contractor, and we had to go, the city council had to approve it. And it was tough. I'll be honest with you. The mayor didn't want to turn loose of that money. I mean, even though we had it, and so the seniors got together a group, and they would come to our council meetings, and they'd say, you have the funds to do this. You have the funds. We need a new center. We need a new center. And so with their encouragement and constantly coming to the council meetings, the mayor finally said, hey, well, maybe we need to do that. But luckily, there was, like I say, several people who were involved in that. Roy Hummel, Bill Beckett, the Williams family, Keith Mars. I know I'm leaving out several people, but we basically pulled together and just said, hey, here's what we need to do. Let's figure out what it's going to cost. We figure out what kind of facility we need, and let's make it happen. We built the fire station and actually City Hall at the same time. And of course, when you look at the size of our city, I mean, when you look at our facilities, and I remind the council of this on a regular basis, we have some of the nicest buildings and facilities, what I would say for a city our size, in the state of Arkansas. And so when we built the fire station and the city hall, we wanted to have the state-of-the-art facilities where we could have some future growth, because we knew eventually the city was going to grow to the point we were going to have a full-time fire department. And so we were ahead of the curve by being able to build a really nice facility that we've not had to expand yet. I know Mark would probably like to expand it a little bit, but we're kind of locked in on our land. But that's kind of where we got through on it. And we paid cash for the fire station and the City Hall building when we built these facilities. that was something that my mother, of course, Betty Hummel had a big. She was big in the library because that's what she grew up with, and her mother, wanted to see a library facility in Farmington. We kind of had a makeshift when we moved up to City Hall here. We kind of had a makeshift library at the old City Hall building, and so and it was okay, and God bless those people. Let me just tell you, if they got so much volunteer work done, electrical, plumbing, just anything that they could get done for, people would volunteer, and they opened up that facility. I didn't think it was going to work. I just thought when I saw it, I just thought, gosh, I just don't know if this is going to work. But people loved it. But it was not the facility that really we needed to have. We really needed a much better facility. So I was talking to Keith Mars one day, and Farmington started developing a little bit on the commercial side. And there was a building that had been built across the street from the existing post office, and it was called Brudeau's Pizza. And I told Keith, and they had actually gone out of business, and it had been vacant, and then it had been a daycare center opened up in it, and that didn't really work. So the building was sitting there vacant, and when they built that building, the owner bought the lot adjoined to it, so it actually had an extra lot. But anyway, I was talking to Keith Mars, and we'd been talking about either building a new library or trying to find a building that would be suitable that we could move into. So Mr. Hummel had come up with a couple of ideas of some property that him and Betty would be willing to donate to build a new library. But we felt like that the location of that was not really suitable because of the size of Double Springs Road and just the ingress and egress in relationship to the school. So in my conversations with Keith Mars, we were talking one day, and he goes, well, he said, I know Brudeau's Pizza's building and that lot next door. He said, I think if you made a reasonable offer, he said, I think you could get that building bought for a very great price. And so I thought, well, and we went over and looked at the building, and we walked through it. Our building inspector went with us, and we talked about with the librarian. We talked about how we could convert the building, and because it was a pizza restaurant, some of the things that we could do and make it work and see if it'd work. And so with the council's blessing, we kind of went in negotiation. But actually, I think the property was listed for $650,000, I believe, with including the extra lot. And with the encouragement of Keith Mars, he said, just make him an offer. And he said, I think the seller, he didn't live here, and he wanted to get out of Farmington basically and quit paying taxes. So so we got to talking about it, and I said, do you think $300,000 would buy it? And he said, let me make an offer. And make a long story short, we ended up buying that building and the lot next door for $330,000. That was what he paid for both commercial lots together. He paid $300,000 just for the land. And so, that was such a win-win deal for our city. And then we were able to go in and spend some money to remodel it inside, and that was just a blessing for our city. Well, I think the development of Southwinds, that's where I moved to when I first moved to Farmington. Actually, I rented a duplex, the first duplex that Keith Mars built. I rented one side of it, and Sue and John Lossing lived in the other side. And of course, they were realtors here in Farmington because we both sold our houses and needed a place to live. But my father and mother bought one of the first lots in Southwinds, Phase 1, and then we bought a lot next door to my mom and dad. So, but that was kind of the starting point for the development in Farmington, residential-wise, because the commercial property really wasn't going to develop until they saw that you had the residential growth and the number of rooftops and homes and people moving to our community. So Southwinds was actually I'd say the kickoff subdivision that started the growth in Farmington. And of course, it's a tremendous amount of lots. I don't know altogether how many houses are in those 5 phases, but that was the starting point for Farmington and the growth. Then we saw the commercial growth follow up, with the McDonald's and the Sonic and the Green Oak Station, and then we started seeing the banks come here. Arvest Bank was the first bank to come to Farmington when they bought Farmers and Merchants Bank, but then First Federal Bank of Harrison opened a branch here, and then the Bank of Fayetteville. So when you start seeing, they saw the same thing we saw. We just got a little head start, from the Arvest side of it, on the growth end of it. But and then of course just north of the bank, in the just all Broil Street, we've had a lot of residential development there. And then the crowning jewel of our, what I say in Farmington, is the Twin Falls subdivision. That's one Keith Mars and his partners developed on acre lots. They're much nicer homes, higher scale homes, and so that gave us a variety. We had the starter homes, we had the Southwinds was kind of the medium income homes, and then Twin Falls is kind of the upper income homes, and so it gave us a good variety of property and home sites that allowed people to want to move to Farmington, basically. The Valley View Golf Course development, that was huge. I never would have thought in my wildest dreams that we'd have a golf course in Farmington, but the way it turned out to be, having that quality of a golf course and then having the lots for people to build houses around them was kind of unheard of at that time. Most of those were in bigger cities, so that was a starting point also for another growth pattern for our city, and of course it's gone. Gosh, there's hundreds of houses there now, and so that just was another area that really took off and made our school system's grown, and that's one of the things that I think the development of our school and the commitment of our school board to have the kind of facilities that we need for our kids and for our education program. So I think that was awesome that they followed suit with the growth of the community and the city. They came up with their money to say, hey, we need to grow our school buildings and our school facilities. So that was kind of a combination with all those residential developments. Well, our growth pattern is actually going to be more towards where the new high school is located now, out that area. And people are looking for not only residential lots, but they're looking for a little bit of acreage. And so if you can find a subdivision or an area where you can, like someone's developed and sold 5-acre tracts of land, that's an attractive area. And so we've done that a little bit out off of Rays Mill Road, but right now there's been a dormant subdivision that's off Clyde Carnes Road that's 110 lots that have been sitting there basically dormant for the last 7-8 years. And so when it got out of its lawsuit with the bondholders, there's a builder now that's buying lots in there and building houses. I think there's 37 houses under construction right now at the same time. So that's going to help spur some more growth into Farmington along with the other residential areas. The one thing I like about Farmington is as we've grown, we've not lost our hometown feel, and that's our slogan, is it feels like home, and that's what we always want to be. And I remind our council of that every time we have a meeting. I said, isn't it great to live here in Farmington? Isn't it great to have a community where you still can go to the ball games and you meet new people, but you also see a lot of the people that's lived here for several years? But that's kind of what we want to never lose that, and we want to have the facilities to make people feel comfortable to come to our community. I know we've made a commitment to expand our Creekside Park, which hopefully will be a great addition to our city and some of the expansion areas there. But basically just to have a good solid city where we come in and do our business. We have good streets, we have water, sewer, good facilities, and I feel like that people can come to City Hall and get their questions answered if they have questions, or just let them know that we appreciate hearing from them. I would start with probably our school system. I would probably tell them that how good a school system that we have. We've got a strength in our administration and a commitment to education. I would think that the community comes together. Our community, I don't know what I want to call it, but I guess just our community in general, how we work together and come together when there's an issue. We've witnessed that with some of our children that have had some medical issues. I mean, this town came together and was remarkable with some parents that had to be at Children's Hospital and things like that. But I mean, we're a community. We're strong. I call it's a strong fit. We have a group of a lot of people that's moved here were not from the Farmington area, and so I just think that they see the value of how we come together as a community. That it's I guess an easygoing community. It doesn't have the hustle and bustle of the larger metropolitan cities that that's to our west. And they just like the smaller community feel, and so I think that's the strength. But our government, we're strong financially. We're good stewards of our city money, and I think that that would add value to someone, in our fire station, our public safety, our police department, fire department. I mean, they're top of the line. I mean, our fire rating is excellent, and our Mark and his crew's done a great job, and Chief Hubbard and our policemen. I mean, they're number one. I mean, just strong, very committed to their job and making Farmington safe. My favorite thing about Farmington is the people that live here. I enjoy. I feel safe being here. I enjoy the businesses that are here. But just the people that I get to meet on a daily basis, either working at the bank or through the city of Farmington, I just enjoy just being here. It's just a good, safe community, and I raised my kids here. They went to Farmington School, graduated from Farmington School. So I mean, I would encourage anybody that knows me or they call me and said, how do you like living in Farmington? I'd say it's great. It's awesome.